Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you all to our latest Speakers Corner event. There are a few new faces and names, I think, and some old ones that haven't been with us for a while, which is good to see. So you're all very welcome to the network and also to this event. Just so that you're aware, we are recording the event for the YouTube channel, so you'll be able to listen to this again and revisit any of the points that we've discussed. So I hope that is okay with everyone. It is good to see so many members of the Innovative Ireland community, as well as a few first-time visitors as well, I think. So for the newbies in the audience, my name is Charlie Tuxworth, and I'm one of the co-founders of Innovate Ireland. And Innovate Ireland is a collaborative network that had its roots in informal meetings in coffee shops between other business commitments. And a couple of us would join up, meet up, drink lots of coffee, share our stories, challenges, worries, and aspirations. And then these meetings would provide a safe place to discuss, moan, share ideas, and pick up some inspiration as well. When we realized how little support there was actually available for those implementing innovation, especially in established businesses, ultimately this led to the creation of Innovate Ireland. And we became the All-Ireland go-to community for practitioners, advocates, and explorers of innovation. So Innovate Ireland provides a forum for great content, best practice and thought leadership, and we're representing our members' views and ambitions at a national and international level. For policymakers and for agencies who are looking to make an impactful change to the economy, to the environment or society, we can provide a route through to the skills and perspectives of innovation practitioners, enthusiasts and advocates. We're completely non-commercial, so if you're involved in any way as a student, practitioner, advisor, and you're based or have a link to the island of Ireland, then search for us on LinkedIn, check out the innovateireland.net and find out more. So on to today's events. We all know that the world is under pressure, whether that's from climate change, coronavirus, conflict, to name but three. We're all pretty confident that things need to change. But what can we actually do? How can we identify and take that first step? You know, and this word sustainability is being used everywhere. It's seriously overhyped, a bit like innovation was a few years ago. And that can lead to confusion, lack of clear direction, and ultimately, if we're not careful, disillusionment. So before I hand over to people who actually know about this subject and can inform us, and before I hand over, basically before we introduce our very special guest, Hannah Keartland, I'm going to hand over now to Alan Doherty from the Innovate Ireland Steering Group to really kick off today's event and to introduce it properly. So Alan, over to you.
Thanks, folks. Hi and welcome. Apologies that I am a little COVIDed at the moment, so we may have to edit out some coughs and splutters along the way, but we'll see how far we get. I have product placement available here just in case. Charlie did say we were non-commercial, but I'll accept sponsorship in Strepsils if that helps anyone. Yeah, I mean, my own very strong conviction is that there's a very strong link between sustainability and innovation in terms of the level of unsustainability in society at the moment means that we will have to fix lots and lots of things, and we will require lots and lots of things to be innovated. So, you know, reaching out to our community of change makers and innovators and problem solvers seems like a great place to start. We seem like we might be just a little bit ahead in the race to make change than other people who are maybe just not as familiar with the concept of disruption, not so familiar with the concept of organizational change on a very widespread level. So, you know, I think that the sustainability effort that's needed is something that innovators should be taking the lead on, ideally. My background, as some of you might know, has been in corporate innovation for the last couple of years. Mid last year, in the midst of the great reset or the great resignation, whichever you want to call it, I did actually do that thing and leave my corporate job and go to try and work on things that were more innovative in the sustainability field specifically, out of personal passion and conviction. So this is something I could speak for days and days and days about. I've got about 10-15 minutes. So I think I would be very eager also to hear what Hannah Keartland has to say. And Hannah is someone who I have been chatting with since about a year ago, since I took the leap, a little bit before maybe, who I've discovered as a kind of a fellow traveler, as someone with a very good business and innovation background, who is also similarly convinced around the importance of sustainability. So the format for today is I'm going to tee this up with some big concepts. I'm going to turn it over to Hannah, and we're going to try and make sure that there's enough time at the end for Q&A and discussions. So in case anyone's getting worried, we're definitely trying to ring fence the presentation time. If you could maybe hold questions to the end, or pop them in the chat, or raise your hand or something, and we will try and come to them at the end, rather than, let's just get through it. They're big topics. I've had a sneak look at Hannah's slides, and so she has had a look at mine. So hopefully the material will sort of dovetail. There are similar themes emerging independently. Great minds very much thinking alike on this one. So I'm not in charge of my own slides today. So Charlie, I'm at your mercy if you can advance it. And just to frame it here, this is the point that Charlie made in the introduction. Sustainability is kind of everywhere, but it's kind of everywhere unevenly and in different pockets of things. So, for example, people who work in financial services will be seeing this ESG stuff coming up. People who work in manufacturing will have a different take on it. People who work in services. And as consumers, we maybe have a different take of this as we would do in our day jobs. As employees, we go to work and we make stuff in factories, that's, or whatever we do. But then we come home and we recycle our bottles and we wash out our yogurt cartons. So, we have different levels of engaging with this sustainability concept, and it impacts our lives in different ways. If you're the head of sustainability for Unilever, than if you're, a single homemaker and you're trying to just do groceries in a more sustainable way. So it is everywhere. It is multi-level in society at the moment, and it's hard to get your head around. So I've got some framing concepts, and Hannah has some more ones afterwards, to try and sort of say, well, how should innovators maybe be approaching this? What are some useful ways in? So Charlie, if you pop on the next slide. So this is just the sort of stuff that you see in media, and it's all bad news stuff. And to an extent, I mean, yeah, it is bad news. It's pretty terrible. So the grumpy looking guy on the side of the slide there is the guy from the United Nations who's presenting a COP, who's telling us that it is an atlas of human suffering and a code red for humanity. Now, these, diplomats and high-level United Nations folks are generally not given to hyperbole. They're generally fairly sober and subtle in their messaging. So if they're shouting code red from the headlines, it's probably pretty serious. You also see Greta Thunberg in there, who has been saying the same type of thing using slightly different language. Our house is on fire. We definitely need to be engaging with this, but I think it's very difficult to get your head around the scale of the problems. You cycle, or you cut down on your beef consumption, or you walk instead of taking the car, and that's the sort of personal impact. But these are maybe not things you can fix as an individual. You can move towards it, and it's important to engage on a personal level. But on a societal level, what's going on, and what are the big levers that we need to move in our work lives, in our professional lives, as well as just in our lifestyles. I mean, it is a human impact on the environment. That's kind of the science is in. It's definitely that. It's very much driven by the first world. Generally, the harm has been happening places we can't see them. Climate change and famines and even conflict in the Ukraine. It's all coming much, much closer to us where we all live. It's coming closer to places like Germany and Ireland and Australia and California, not just, the global south. So, while it is driven by consumption patterns in the first world, it's now the chickens will start coming home to roost with climate change in our areas as well. I mean, it's quite interesting that some of the wealthier nations do have maybe a disproportionate share of the blame for these sort of things. But we are in a position where we can potentially do something about it in our professional lives. And Charlie, if you tip on the slide for us there, please. So this is just a way of looking at it. So we all know about carbon footprints and carbon metrics, right? But it's not just carbon, but carbon is very, very important. Carbon, CO2, and things like methane as well. cause, these are the greenhouse emissions which cause global warming. Global warming's bad because it messes with our weather in ways that we don't like in our climate, and it threatens things like food supply as well as, you know, catastrophic weather. But the striking thing about this curve, I thought was really interesting, is it tips along for thousands and thousands of years of human existence until you get to the 20th century, and then it just takes off like a rocket. Now, if that was your startup and that was a revenue chart, you'd be really happy, because it does do that, you know, vertical takeoff, hockey stick growth type thing, which is fantastic, but not so good when it's pointing to things that are going horribly wrong. On if this was a CEO dashboard, I mean, that would be horrible. So, you know, we're getting to a really inflection point here, because the hotter it gets and the more CO2 there is, then the bigger problem we're going to have to reverse out of. So interesting framing concept for us here. So what is causing the curves to rise? What caused it to take that massive rocket up at the start of the 20th century? And if you flip on to the next slide, I'll give you potentially a provocative take on it, right? Innovation did, in a way. Innovation and human ingenuity did, because we raised lifestyles and we progressed enormously in our technology and in transportation and in finance and communications, you know, and it's only getting faster. So, you know, things like the internet are speeding up consumption of resources, consumption of energy, movement of goods and services. You know, things like fast fashion couldn't happen without the internet. Things like, you know, the types of lifestyles that people expect to have around the world with 2 cars in every family, and everyone has a home that looks like an American sitcom sort of type home. These things are made possible, and they're sort of encouraged by movies and television that comes largely from America, you know, things like that. So there are tons and tons of things, but it is the sum of all of the innovations and the way we have applied them to things has had this impact. It's caused the impact to accelerate from, you know, basically kind of pre-industrial agrarian lifestyles to technological consumeristic ones. And that is really good news and really bad news. It's, you know, it's terrible news because we're doing it to the environment, and it's really terrible stuff that we're doing, but it's good news in that if human ingenuity caused it, hopefully the ingenuity of maybe some of the folks on the call and our combined sort of sector that we work in will be able to come up with some solutions. So that's the next slide, is really, you know, what's a right and proper way for us to start looking at this? You know, and we won't come up with any solutions if we don't focus on them. So the first thing is just put it on the agenda. It's very firmly on the agenda, but maybe, okay, so as innovators, how can we engage best with this? So I've got some ideas and of just directions to point you in to maybe just do further reading and further research, and very happy to take some debate on this, and very happy to hear Hannah's thoughts on it as well. So next slide is setting something up. So innovation in economics, reframing the problem, and how we can reframe problems. As innovators, it's probably one of the first things that you do going into a workshop or any kind of a problem solving sprint, is you try and reframe the problem in a useful way. So reframing the economics of progress is probably one of the most important things we can do. So, you know, the clever folks who have done a bit of sustainability reading will know exactly what Homer Simpson's doing there, eating a donut. And the answer is on the next slide. It's because there's a whole genre of stuff called donut economics, written by the lovely Kate Rayworth, who is an economist and an author. But I think it's fair to say she's probably an innovator as much as an economist and an author, because her concept of the donut is this donut-shaped thing, which is basically a circle with a hole in the middle of it. The inside, the hole of the donut, is the hole that you don't want to fall into from a societal point of view. You know, that's when you don't have enough. That's what all of our great progress has actually delivered more of, you know, more food, more water, more health, more education, better income levels, better housing, more social equity, all of those kind of things. That, you know, you don't want to go below the boundary and fall into the hole of the donut. At the same time, though, there is a ceiling. The outer boundary of the donut is, you know, when we are using too much of the Earth's resources, or using them in a bad way, causing lots and lots of waste and pollution and negative consequences. So conceptually, you know, to me, I have been a words and pictures person my entire career, not a maths person. So, the fact that number one, Kate Raworth has got me reading an economics book is fantastic progress. That is an innovation in itself. But it's also, it's an indication to me of how important these kind of mental models are and how these diagrams are. I know Hannah's got some further depth on this later, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but just I love the idea that a visual can tweak my brain. And it's not about the graph, the first graph that we saw going up and up and up and up, which is the typical kind of economic growth model. It's no, we got to exist in the space, the sweet spot, that kind of Cinderella spot between the ecological ceiling and the social foundation. So if you go to the next slide, I'll start teasing two approaches to this. I found a Homer Simpson, and I found a Bill Gates beside him on the Google page. So Bill has very important things to say about how to avoid a climate disaster. It's the name of his book, and it's all about the breakthroughs we need. That's the subtitle on it. And Bill being a very influential person in our society, and a book very widely read. I'll give you on the next slide just break down. This is one of the approaches. It's green growth. So this is when we have breakthrough innovations in energy and materials. So that means that we can keep on driving cars and eating meat and going on foreign holidays and doing all these great things, because we will have found clever ways to generate the energy to do them and clever ways to make the stuff out of materials. So it's business as usual, or business better in a sustainable way. And there's a series of things like moonshots, the special innovation projects, to try and kind of get across these planetary limits. And always a feature of these things, there is a plan B when we fail to stay within these planetary limits. More than one of the green growth advocates, Bezos and Musk and the like, have plans to maybe transcend other planetary limits as well. So that's the plan B, is we mess up this one, let's go and start another one somewhere. It's a tough road, because if you have an innovation background, you will know that this additive innovation stuff is it's quite easy to keep building on incrementally on things that are already here. So let's have cars, but let them be Teslas instead of diesel driven ones, and let's have trainers, but let's make them out of plant-based materials instead of oil-based materials. That's great, but it's actually pretty tough to make it a reality. I'll give you an idea how tough it is on the next slide. The US climate envoy John Kerry, and this sort of always stops me in my tracks when I read it. 50% of the reductions we have to make to get to net zero by 2050 or 2045 are going to come from technologies we don't yet have. So that is, to my mind, the mother of all Hail Marys. I mean, this is an absolute punt on just, guys in innovation labs all over the world are really going to have to get the finger out, because, 50% of what we're going to need in the next 20 years is not yet invented, and it's in an innovation lab that it's somewhere. It's a remarkable kind of statement of the faith that people are placing in innovators, frankly. Slightly terrifying when you think of the output of lots of corporate innovation labs, and indeed the failure rate, because we've all been kind of brought up as innovators to go fail fast, fail fast, fail fast. But the attrition rate and the trail of failed projects, that's not going to look fantastic as the planet's warming and things are either catching fire or underwater. So personally, I think there's a balance to be found between some of the technology innovation and the next thing on the next slide, which is a thing called degrowth, which is, it's not so much about the fancy innovations coming up with better batteries and stuff like that. It's more about thought process behind these things, maybe trying to get people to measure progress in a different way and do more with less, and tweak people's brains. And this is, I think both kinds are going to be needed. Plot spoiler, I think it's going to be a blend of all of these different types of things. But for degrowth to happen, I think it's probably more about there will be a greater influence from government, from regulation, from other stakeholders, not just stockholders and shareholders. But this is a tough sell, because it's subtractive innovation. Instead of taking something and building on it, this is actually about doing less Anybody who's been part of a digital transformation or a robotic process automation thing in an organization will be aware that there's a certain point where you're automating a process, but maybe if you took a little step back, you might just get rid of the process altogether instead of automating it and making it more efficient. It's a process that mightn't maybe have a right to exist if you measured it a different way. Degrowth is a little bit like that. It's about maybe instead of trying to do capitalism better or do consumerism in a green way, it's about maybe doing less consumerism. So it's subtler and it's less obvious in ways, and it's a hard one to push. There's a good quote on degrowth, and I'm nearly onto the end of it. So this is from a lady called Donella Meadows, who wrote a book called The Limits to Growth, which is 50 years old. And if you read it now, there was lots of things about 2 weeks ago, because it was literally 50 years it was published, stunningly prescient in terms of their predictions of how far things were going to go. So the scarcest resource is not oil, metals, clean air, capital, labor, or technology. It's our willingness to listen to each other and learn from each other and to seek truth rather than seek to be right. And, as practitioners of innovation, this is stuff that you get drummed into you all the time. Multi-stakeholder workshops, get everybody's opinions in the room, develop empathy for other people's viewpoints, and test everything and validate everything rather than just trying to be right all the time. So it's a fantastic, again, for something that was written 50 years ago, it's could live right in the front of any kind of design thinking workshop, and highly recommend a read of Donella Meadows. I've got one final slide which has 5 bullet points on it. Again, one of the books that I generally go to try and tweak people's brains on this sort of stuff, Kimberly Nicholas. She boils it down in her book, and she repeats these 5 things. It's warming. It's us. We're sure. It's bad, but we can fix it. And I think that is the challenge. The science is in. It's definitely happening. It's definitely going to have terrible consequences. But as innovators and as humans, we can fix it. And hopefully that's it. My last slide, if you tip on to the next one, is to say thank you very much. My voice lasted. Thank you for Strepsils, and thank you to Hannah. And unless there's any kind of burning questions, I think we can go straight into Hannah's bit, and then we can have a little bit of a debate afterwards, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Alan. Hi everyone. Let me just pull up my slides, which definitely build on what Alan has been sharing. Can you see those?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, they look like they're supposed to do. Can you see any notes? No? Super.
No.
I'm not as much of a Teams girl, so I never quite know how it's going to work. Super. So
sorry, Hannah. I think you may be sharing the PowerPoint so we can click through it ourselves rather than presenting it. So if you share the window rather than the PowerPoint.
It says I'm in presenter mode. Does it not look right?
I think if you move on to your next slide, I don't think it's going to move for people.
That works?
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, it did. Sorry, ignore me. Ignore me completely.
Well, you're the Teams on a Mac expert. Super. So hi everyone. Very brief intro to me. I'm Hannah Keartland, based in the UK. So I feel like a bit of an imposter joining all of you in Ireland. But it's lovely to be here. As Alan said, it sort of feels like we're fellow travellers, have both done lots of innovation within business. I did most of my innovation within the charity sector here in the UK. Started life out as an accountant, so sort of come from that background, then moved into sort of project delivery. I worked within business, I've worked in banking, but I moved into the charity sector quite early on, and also worked in sort of for-purpose. Oh, thanks, Owen. Also worked in for-purpose businesses as well. So I've felt passionately pretty much since my accountancy training days that there's a different way of doing business. And it's now that I can sort of see it all come together. I've developed this problem-solving toolkit throughout my career. I personally think the charity model's broken. That's not going to solve the challenges that we've got in society and with the climate. But I do think that business has a massive role to play. I think business business is scalable, it's international, it's commercially sustainable, you're giving people something they're actually paying for. If you've got a financially sustainable model that is scalable, then that's how we're going to tackle these problems at scale. And so I think it's really exciting, the opportunity for the businesses that do grab hold of this and tackle some of these problems. What I'm going to do with you now is, this is slightly less, there's not a flow to my talk in the way that there was to Alan's. What I've done is I've kind of pulled together some things that have got me thinking, because the idea with this is I want this to be stimulus to try and get you thinking as well. So some of the things I've seen, I thought, oh, that's really interesting from an innovation perspective, or some of the questions I've asked myself. So this is all about sort of provocation and stimulus to hopefully, get your brain juices going and hopefully stimulate some discussion. So I've started a similar place to where Alan started, by sort of saying sustainability means a lot of things. And a lot of the talk is often around environmental sustainability, but I think it's helpful to start with the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. And these were developed in 2015, and the idea is that they're going to be delivered by 2030. And they cover a huge number of things. A lot of the things that were in that donut that Alan shared. What I find it's a really helpful starting point with business to sort of look at these goals, spend some time on them, especially as a leadership team, and sort of say, which of these are relevant to our business? Which are the ones that resonate with us, that we're excited by? Because not every business can tackle all of these. There's too much on there. But by working together and collaborating, then we can all come together and tackle these goals, and we can collaborate with other people who are tackling similar goals to us. And that, I think, is a really key point with all of this sustainability stuff, is it's about collaboration, it's about working together, rather than thinking in terms of our organizational silos, because these problems are so huge, they're so interconnected and systemic, and they're so kind of big and gnarly. It's about being really open and connected and collaborative. Now, this is similar to what Alan shared. So on the right, you've got Kate Rayworth's donut model. On the left, what you've got is the planetary boundaries model, it's similar. And this was developed by a guy called Rockstrom. And for humanity to continue to survive and to thrive for generations to come, we need to operate within the planetary boundaries. And you can see some of them where, we are pushing right beyond, we are well beyond the boundaries in some of the areas now. And if we cross those boundaries, then the risk of creating catastrophic, irreversible change exists. I think this is really interesting from an innovation point of view, because it's providing constraints, and constraints can be great fuel for innovation. It's really hard to innovate when you haven't got constraints. And so when I see these diagrams, it makes me think, wow, if we put those constraints out there into an ideation session and use them as a sort of fuel for creativity, what could that do? And if this is something you're interested in, so I mean, Alan's mentioned donut economics, and Kate Rayworth, who wrote that's got a brilliant TED talk. There's also Johan Rockstrom, so that's Rockstrom. He's got some amazing talks as well. So if you search for him on YouTube, you can find his TED talks. And then there's also Breaking Boundaries on Netflix that's got lots about this. And so this made me think, and this is, again, Alan touched on this, how might we de-link economic growth from the use of finite natural resources? And, there is a question around degrowth. I think there's also this question. And if we put some real creative minds thinking about this and breaking that link between economic growth and consumption of natural resources, I think that starts to create some interesting ideas. So we're talking about sort of less materially heavy consumption. And one example of that is shifting to service-based business models. So, for example, rental of cars, or what if none of us owned our boiler within our home? The boiler, we rented the boiler. And this starts to get quite interesting as well, because if the boiler is rented, then it's in the interests of you're actually buying a service of heat to your house. You are then renting, you're just paying for that service. The boiler, the actual sort of hardware, continues to be owned by the business. So it's in their interest to keep it operating as effectively and as efficiently as possible. It also means that when it's appropriate to do so, that hardware goes back to them, which makes it so much easier for them to dismantle it and recycle it, rather than the consumers and all these millions of consumers being left with these things they don't know what to do with, where it's more likely to end up in landfill. And then on a totally different level, this was just something I found quite interesting. It's my son's best friend's 7th birthday this weekend. And I mean, I struggle with children's birthdays because of the amount of just stuff and consumption, and everyone turns up with a plastic toy. And actually for her birthday, they've asked everyone's clubbed together and given a certain amount of money to create a big pool of money from the whole class, and that's being spent to give her some riding lessons. And I thought, wow, that's brilliant. She's going to love those riding lessons. They're going to stick with her far more than if she'd got a pile of stuff that she didn't really want. And I mean, I haven't done a full analysis, but my guess is that the impact on the planet is probably less than if she had a whole load of stuff that that broke after a day or she wasn't interested in. So I think this is an interesting question that, putting some creative minds on, we could come up with some interesting different ideas. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but I wanted to introduce the idea of the circular economy. So we've been living in quite a linear way. So, we extract whatever we need, our raw materials, we turn them into something, we consume it, and then we get rid of it, we throw it away. And the reality is that there isn't an away. Anything that we sort of throw, it's going somewhere else, even if it's external to our own system. And so this idea of circularity is really interesting. It's about, well, how does the waste from one process become the raw materials for another? And what I think is quite exciting about that is reducing waste is really good for the environment, and also seeing value in waste it makes sense commercially. So I think this is really interesting from an environmental point of view. This diagram itself is quite technical. If you want to learn more about circularity, the place to go is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They've got loads on there. What I'm going to do now, though, is I'm going to just share a couple of examples to kind of bring this to life, and both of which just blew my mind when I saw them. So the first one is British Sugar, and they were making sugar, which is, I'm trying to see where here we go. They've got their sugar products here. So they had sugar beet coming in, sugar products coming out. And what they did was they looked at all the waste products that were produced throughout that entire production process, and they found ways to commercialize those. And that means that they are now producing, so these were their inputs at the top, limestone, sugar beet and fuel. They are now producing all of these value streams, these products that are generating value for them all along the bottom. So, for example, when they were washing the sugar at the beginning, off comes some soil and some stones. Well, rather than just throwing those away, they now sell those to the construction industry. And then there's other stuff that comes off throughout the process that they can turn into animal feed, for example. Or over here, they're using temperature to then go into greenhouses, which then produces tomatoes that they're selling. And so the only waste at the end is clean water, which goes into the local river. And I think that's amazing because environmentally, it means you're not producing waste that is, having to be got rid of. Also, from a business point of view, they've diversified their income streams and they've created more income for the business. Similar but different, and this really blew my mind when I saw it. This is the Callenberg Symbiosis, which is in Denmark. And it's an industrial area in Denmark, and there are a range of different businesses that are all co-located, with the waste from one factory being used as an input into the next factory. So all of the factories that are co-located together have a symbiotic relationship. And you can see on this how the energy, the water and the materials are all sort of passing between all the different factories. And you can see, there are some big corporate names on there. And together they've saved millions of pounds by doing this and by taking value from each other's waste, and then they share that cost saving between themselves. So again, it makes commercial sense and it makes environmental sense at the same time. This is an interesting startup. It's still at prototype stage, but I find it quite interesting. They are challenging the waste and recycling market, and at the moment the focus is domestic, but you can kind of see how this could become much larger. So the the current recycling model is not great. There's a lot of things you can't recycle, and it doesn't always end up being recycled. It often ends up in landfill. This is kind of the size of a dishwasher. You plumb it in, you plug it into the electricity, and you have it in your kitchen. And what you do is you put your recyclable materials in at the top, so your glass bottle or your tin can. It washes it, it removes the label, it then breaks it down into a really fine dust. And then it has different boxes at the bottom where it stores sort of broken down aluminium, glasses of different colours, bits of plastic. And then it has sensors in there so that it sends an alert for when you need your stuff to be collected. And then you book a collection, you leave it at the side of the road, it gets collected, you get a new set of boxes to plug into the bottom. And what's nice from that is it's reducing the number of collections, because you don't need a collection once a week. So it's reducing the trucks out on the road and the pollution from that. What they're also doing is, because they can sell those raw materials back into production processes, you will make money back from this, so that actually your ownership of this pays for itself over a period of time, because you get your share of the income from when those raw materials are sold. This one I think is interesting. So this is lab-grown meat. So this is cultured meat. So this is beef. It tastes like beef. It is beef. It originally comes from a beef cell, but it's made without coming from a cow. So you don't need a burping, farting cow living in a field to produce this beef, but it is still beef. It's not plant-based. And I think this is really interesting because it's about challenging assumptions. So, and this is what we do day in, day out. This is what innovators do, and we've got the skills and the tools to do. And I think, if we can start challenging some of these assumptions, like beef has to come from a cow, where might that take us? And I think things like this are showing us that let's think big, let's think crazy, let's challenge the things that seem like they were, if someone says it's impossible, then let's find out what we can do about it. This is a disassembled car, and this sort of links with the circularity principles. If we want to make sure that nothing ends up going to landfill and that everything becomes useful again at the end of its life, we need to be thinking about end of life at the beginning when we're doing the design process. And I've heard examples of designers going and doing disassembly of the products that they are producing in order to understand what design constraints they might want to put in place at the beginning. So apparently a MacBook computer is an absolute nightmare because there's loads of glue in it. Apparently you just cannot separate the screen from the metal behind it and all the componentry. And so at the end of life, it is nigh on impossible to do anything useful with it. Whereas if you get those designers at the beginning, rather than just having design constraints around feasibility, viability, desirability, if you're also having sustainability constraints in there and you're getting them to understand what that actually means at end of life. So I took apart a kettle with my 4-year-old, and there weren't screws. You couldn't take it apart without snapping bits of plastic. So you couldn't mend it, and you couldn't recycle it because you couldn't separate things because there was so much glue in there. And I think that's quite interesting, because how do we build that into the design process? So I just wanted to end here. So this is from Bill Gates's book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. And this is the title of his second chapter. This will be hard. And I don't know about you, but as an innovator, I saw that title and I kind of thought, bring it on. That's what we're here for. We're here to solve problems. Give me some hard problems and, let me at them. Let's tackle them, because we've got the skills and we've got the experience to make those bold breakthroughs that we need to make in order to tackle the problems that exist. Thanks, Owen. I don't know who I'm handing over to now. I'm hoping that sparks some nice conversation.
I think we can jump back in and stay on mic and see if people can throw some questions at us or opinions, or give us some sort of a viewpoint, or push. Oh, Shane's got his hand up, and Shane's looking like he's got a zinger. Any particular person you want to aim this at, me or Hannah, or the floor?
I guess at both of you, and this is just a thought that popped into my head as I was listening to the both of you. And somewhat inspired by your hockey stick graph, it strikes me that if we look at this through the lens of belief systems, that, you know, are sort of the big religions were invented in a time when there was very few people on the planet, and sort of unsurprisingly, they have a huge focus on the value of life, which arguably led to a growth in population. At a certain point, then, our economic belief system was invented when there was lots of people, but they were growing. And it seems to me, or I wonder what you think about that, the innovation we really need is a belief system for a static population. Because I think that's the thing, that we don't know how to exist in a world that's not growing.
Hannah, do you have a burning desire to jump in?
Sorry,
that's a hospital pass.
So perhaps none of us have had enough alcohol for a question like that, but anyway.
I think so much of this is about culture and mindset and the stuff that is going to take years to shift. And so I think when we think about this so there are, like, there's a lady who I've been talking to who's out in Finland. She's bringing together a group of like real transformational systems thinkers to try and like think, how do we use our innovation thinking to design a whole new system? I suppose I'm in the more practical camp of, yeah, that's really useful, and we can't just incrementally change the system, but at the same time, we cannot spend 50 years taking people on a journey. You know, we need to do some stuff right now because that's what the science is telling us. And so I think, yes, we need to change mindsets, but that's happening anyway. Younger people who are coming through, their mindset is different to the people who are in charge of businesses at the moment. And so there's part of me thinking we need to sell it in a bit of a, I mean, like some of those examples I gave where they make financial sense and they make sustainability sense. I think we're going to stand much more of a chance. They're still pretty transformational, and we know how much businesses struggle with even doing transformational innovation. So I think we do need a massive shift in terms of belief system, but I'm not sure that's the right starting point, because I mean, look, like political leaders, I think one of our biggest challenges is we've not got clear vision of where we're trying to get to. So how can we start on the journey? We all know there's a problem. There's massive climate anxiety, but nobody knows where we're trying to get to. So everyone's sort of slightly floundering around because people at a political level can't agree on where we're going. I don't know if that answers you, Shane.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's
that a little bit. I have a.
Sorry, go on, Alan.
Sorry, no, I just have an interesting thing that it might not be about belief systems. I mean, whatever we believe may be rendered irrelevant by whatever the climate decides to do. About 2 weeks ago, when the Limits to Growth book was 50 years old, there was a webinar with Dennis Meadows, who was married to Donella Meadows. He's now an elderly, professorly type guy, and they were asking him, you know, what do you think? 50 years, you've been telling us that, you know, there's no such thing as infinite growth on a planet with finite resources. So, you know, what do you think? And he kind of was it was a slightly depressing answer, in that he just sort of said degrowth is going to happen anyway, whether you wanted it or not. So, you know, if you think GDP growth is a great thing, they're having kind of largely a climate-driven war in the Ukraine at the moment. So if you imagine that the Ukrainian economy has gone through a period of degrowth at the moment, yes, it has. But, you know, when Australia is in the midst of all of the wildfires, then towns that have burnt down have experienced a sort of degrowth. So, you know, our belief system is definitely part of the problem, and, you know, having a different one that cultivates a different attitude towards these things. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of almost a cliche, but we're all sort of global north middle class folks working in professional jobs. You know, it's almost a cliche to refer to it, but the indigenous people around the world are sort of sometimes very patronizingly seen as a source of great wisdom around this. But you know, it's not their carbon footprint that's causing global warming at the same time, you know, so there might be something in it. So I don't want to come over and sort of say, well, we should all become mystics and start following some, you know, South American shamanistic tradition or whatever. It might not be the answer, but certainly they're not causing global warming at the same time. So I don't know. Belief systems definitely a part to play, but from where we are at the moment in a consumerist society, we're all connected by devices and we're all consuming power and having, driving around and taking flights. As Hannah says, the working on the belief system might not be a quick enough fix. Maybe we need some of Bill Gates or Elon Musk's technological fixes just to buy us a little bit more time. After that, we can work on the philosophy of the thing. But let's put out the fire first, and then think about a philosophical framework for it afterwards. Maybe.
I might argue that changing your belief system is quicker, because politicians stand their opinions on belief systems. So until there's a viable belief system that points to the alternate future, then we'll keep, as Suzanne Vega once sang, challenging the future with a profound lack of history.
Excellent quote. I got two more hands up if anyone wants to lob in with another question or two.
Yeah. I'll go, Owen. Okay, thank you for, first of all, Hannah and Alan, really insightful outline that you gave us. Picking up on Hannah's point about the kind of the mindset of the younger generation, if you like, that they're more likely to behave themselves and be aware of the impact that they're having on the environment. There's a big piece around education, not in terms of the next generation workforce, but the education of the current workforce and the senior management teams who are all driven by commercial sense and commercial profit. So the model that you showed around Denmark or the factories in Denmark was really interesting, but it makes commercial sense for them to do that. So how do we get to the point where these things will make commercial sense rather than somebody having to take a bit of a flyer? Or is it going to take stick and carrot? If you don't do something, you're going to get heavily taxed, or here's some money to go and do something. How do we fill the gap before making these changes makes commercial sense, I guess, is what my question is.
I think it's going to be a messy transition. It's not going to be as linear and neat and orderly and sort of strategized as we think it will be. So I think there's a lot of stuff that does make commercial sense now. And I think this is where the innovation experience that we've all got is relevant, because we know that businesses find it hard to change. And which of the businesses that are up for transformational innovation, it doesn't really matter whether that's in the sustainability space or not, it's going to be the same ones that go, wow, here's a really cool thing we could do. And the fact that it's going to have environmental benefits as well as commercial benefits, like both of the British Sugar one and the Danish one, I don't think that's going to. I think is the business good at doing innovation, full stop. I don't think businesses that have struggled with innovation till now are suddenly going to become amazing at it because there's commercial opportunities from sustainability, because they've been useless at taking those bold approaches before. And I mean, both of those are quite transformational ways of thinking about things. I do think I think that there needs to be, there are commercial benefits. There's some stuff that does cost money and is going to need R&D, though I do think that the writing's on the wall. We know what the world is going to look like in future. We know that the businesses that can operate in a net zero world are the ones that are going to survive and be the leaders. So actually, the ones that are bold and brave now and invest and create, if you're in R&D and you invest in R&D that develops something that is needed and tackles a problem that exists, for example, around like recyclability of batteries or battery life, or like the sorts of things we know are problems. If you can solve that problem first, then that's got to make commercial sense as well. And I think, one thing I have to do is remember, not everyone's going to be doing it for ethical, responsible reasons. They're not going to feel that in the same way I do. Good question, Owen. They're not going to feel that in the same way that I do. And that's not how I'm going to sell it into them. It's talking to them about the risk of not doing anything and the value of doing it. And there are big risks, and there's going to be more regulation coming down the line. There are employees who are more and more discerning of who they work for, and they'll vote with their feet. Investors are becoming more demanding. Customers as well. You look at the NHS, and in a few years' time, if you have not got a really clear carbon reduction plan and you're not reporting against it every year to show the progress you're making, you will not be able to trade with the NHS. And if we start seeing that from the NHS and from big corporates, that's going to trickle internationally through the whole, through entire supply chains. And if you've then got regulation coming in on top of that, it's all going to add up, and it's going to be messy and it's going to be unordered, but it's going to be driven by those commercial risks and value and opportunities, rather than by me saying we ought to do this because it's the right thing to do, because sadly I've realized that that's not going to drive change.
Yeah, it's not going to get us there. No, thank you for that. Thank you very much. Owen, I'm conscious of 5 minutes left, so over to you for yours. You're on mute. 10 seconds lost on t-shirts.
I've only got 5 questions, so that won't keep us longer than 3 o'clock. Don't worry. Don't have no fear. Why did the J curve go down in 1600? Malthus was wrong then, and he's going to be wrong now. We're going to have population static numbers globally within this century. Hans Rosling is a really good resource for that. How do we plan for that? But I think the one I'd like to just get a quick feel for is, what do you think, Hannah, or Alan, or both? Are we going to get more of this? Do we need this technology that doesn't exist? Or is it just that we don't have those technologies ready? Where is more of this going to come from, do you feel? Are you optimistic, pessimistic?
I just want to jump in and say, I'm very skeptical. I think, I think you're probably going to get an innovation lab-like ratio on this stuff, which is, that 90+% of it will be, it'll fail or it'll be impractical. We have carbon capture and storage happening on a, billions and billions of dollars being invested for absolutely zero return, maybe sort of a proof of concept. It's not going anywhere fast. I think there will be breakthroughs made, but it's very hard to predict which ones. That's why it's innovation. That's why it's proper, real innovation, as opposed to incremental. So I don't know. I'm very skeptical of large corporations and sort of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates. I love Bill Gates sort of that chapter heading that you pulled up, Hannah, saying it's going to be hard. If it's going to be hard from a guy sitting on the top deck of a super yacht somewhere, if it's going to be tough for billionaires, it's going to be brutal on the rest of us, right? So I'm not entirely sure that I buy into the whole, doing well by doing good, or that this is going to be a great driver of shareholder value. I think we're going to see much more. I think impacts like COVID. Nobody sort of said, "Oh, great, COVID's been fantastic, best thing that ever happened," because it gave our digital transformation effort a kickstart. But kind of it did. Looking back on it, it possibly did, but nobody would have embraced it in that way. And I don't think people should really be embracing sustainability as a way to drive business efficiency. Like climate damage, environmental damage as a driver of shareholder value. I'm not sure it's the right positioning. I always find that a little tone deaf. So I think it's going to be a mix of a lot of different things, Owen, to be honest.
Cool. Got to give the last word to Hannah, and then we got to finish up in a minute.
Oh, I had a thought in my head and it's disappeared.
That's because thinking is bad for you, Hannah. We have definitely established that.
It's come back. I do think that startups play a huge role in this, and it's something Alan and I have talked about in terms of who do we work with, and where's the energy for this coming from. And for all the reasons that startups are the ones who tend to come up with a lot of the really big transformational innovation in any space, I do think startups that it is part of their mission, and from the very beginning it is built into the core of who they are. They're establishing themselves now in this world. They're not trying to change a business that's been around for tens of years and trying to kind of change the culture and the way they make decisions. Decision making is something I'm really interested in, and I think it's really hard to change that if you're not changing the people at the top and the mindset and the belief system that they've got. Whereas setting up a startup where you've got different people in a leadership team who are all coming together because they share values and they share a mission, that I think is where we're going to see a lot of the real innovation, just like we do in many other instances.
Great. Well, thank you.
There we go. Go into injury time for a question from Deirdre.
Just those startups need venture capital usually to scale, and it's the decision making at venture capital level as to what is a return on an investment. what is shareholder value. I think that'll be critical too, because the VCs have put an awful lot of money into terribly damaging startups as well. So that's a key element in the economics, I suppose, of it all.
Yeah. Really good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a very fair point. Thank you, everyone.
Really liked your questions, everybody. It was really good today, Shane. I'll definitely pick up, and yeah, there's a lot that can be discussed, because if you would just accelerate, if you stop the slowing growth, acceleration, then you would just diversity as well, which is essential for both innovation and sustainability. So there's definitely a research paper in there somewhere. So thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hannah. We do need to bring this to a close now. It has been extremely useful, and it's started the conversation that certainly hasn't closed it out. So absolutely delighted you could come along today and join us. And we'll get everyone. I know everyone's got to jump, so hopefully see you all again soon. Take care of yourselves and have a good weekend. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Bye bye.